Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. This week's Parsha is actually kind of hard to pronounce, and there's some differences of opinion about how you pronounce this, but um, I'm going to pronounce it Beha'alotcha, Beha'alotcha, 5 syllables. This is the book of Numbers, chapter 8, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 16. And this is what I have planned. As always, I want to start with a summary of all of the highlights of what happens in the Parsha. I want to focus on the incident with Miriam, which, if you're familiar, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, you'll know a whole lot more in an hour. I want to extrapolate from that some of the teachings about Lashon HaRa, which, if you don't know what that is, you'll know more in an hour. And then I have a couple of life lessons that get pulled out of this week's parsha, but I don't know if we're going to have time for all of that. So let's go ahead and begin. So, as I told you, the name of the parsha is Beha'alotcha, and it means when you raise, and it's found in the book of Numbers, chapter 8, verse 2. And basically, this parsha details the preparations that the Israelites made as they begin their journey from Har Sinai, from Mount Sinai to Eretz Israel, to the Promised Land. So here are the basic highlights. Number one, from Beha'alotcha, Aaron, the high priest, is commanded to raise up, to light the lamps of the menorah, and his tribe, the tribe of Levi, is initiated into the service of the sanctuary. Now, in the book of Leviticus, we we know this already, but this is where it actually begins to happen. The second incident, or like a sort of headline of this, is what we call today Pesach Sheni. So the second Passover is instituted in response to some people who were unable to bring the Passover offering at its appointed time because they were ritually impure. And so they go to Moshe and they say, why should we be deprived of that because we had contact with a corpse or whatever? And so Moshe institutes something called Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. Interestingly enough, until today, so we don't on Pesach Sheni we don't have korbanos, we don't have offerings right now at this time in history. But what people's custom, we still do mark Pesach Sheni, and one of the ways that it's marked is that a month after Passover, the same Hebrew date, people eat matzah. There could be more to it than that, but that's the only thing I have ever heard of, that on Pesach Sheni we remind each other to have a meal with matzah. Okay. The next sort of headline, so we have Aaron and the Levium being sort of their first day at work. We have Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. Now also God is going to give a lot of instruction in this parsha to Moshe about how the Israelites are supposed to move as they go through the desert, how the exact formation that they're supposed to take on when they move from Mount Sinai, because they've been at Mount Sinai about a year. So now we're talking about, it is approximately a year and well, it's 50 days. So what is that? A year and 2 months or so since leaving Egypt. So it's still pretty early in the 40-year journey. And next week we'll talk about why it took them 40 years to get there. But there's rules about how the people, it's a lot of people, how they are going to move through the desert. And those rules are explained in this week's Parsha, in the chapters that I told you. Also, as they are getting ready to set out, Moshe
Honey,
implore. I just heard some. Margaret, can you mute yourself? I, I don't know if it's you, but okay, thanks. Okay. Moshe implores Yitro, who is Moshe's father-in-law, Tzipporah's father, to join them as they are going to the promised land. But Yitro, he declines and he says he's going to return to his native land. Then we have the whole episode of what we refer to as the quail. So there are complainers in the group, and the people are dissatisfied with the mun, the bread from heaven, the manna that God has been sending them to nourish them, and and they demand, this is obviously not all the people, but some of them, they demand that Moshe supply them with meat, and they start looking back on, oh, when we lived in Egypt, we had all these fresh fruits and vegetables, and we had all the fish we could eat, blah, 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 blah. So you can imagine that this did not make God happy. And in response, he sends them such an abundance of quail that the people are overwhelmed. And the Torah describes like how deep it is and how far from the camp, like the entire camp is surrounded by massive amounts of quail. But Hashem is angry with them for demanding meat because he gave them, we don't have time to get into it, but manna is like this perfect food. And it's like another rejection of what God has said is good for them, and they said, no, we want something different. So there is also a very brief mention of a plague that comes on the people who consume the quail. He's like up to here. He can't handle this responsibility. I'm paraphrasing, but he goes to God and he says, I can't do this by myself. And so God tells him to appoint 70 elders, and they assist him with the burden of governing the people. And the big story that we're going to really focus on for the next whatever is Miriam's speaking negatively about Moshe and being punished with Sarat. Moshe's prayer for her healing, and the fact that the entire community waits 7 days for her recovery. So let's get into this by reviewing the episode inside. That means looking at the text. This is in Bamidbar chapter 12. I'm just going to read the first, I think it's 14 verses. I'm going to read them to you in English so that we just sort of review the story. Okay. So chapter 12, verse 1, if you have a Bible there, you can look at yours. Miriam and Aaron spoke to one another against Moshe regarding how he had divorced the Cushite woman. That is a reference to Zipporah, that he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Verse 2, they said, has God spoken only to Moshe? Has he not spoken to us too? And God heard this. Okay, so they're having this little conversation about their brother, and God overhears. Okay, now the next verse says, now this man Moshe was exceedingly humble, more so than any person on earth. This is hammered in, by the way, over and over and over again, this idea that humility was one of the characteristics of Moshe that is for which he is the most well known. So he does not come to his own defense. God comes to his defense. And we see in verse 4, God suddenly says to Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, all three of you, to the tent of meeting. That's the tabernacle. That's the Mishkan. And all three went out. And God descended in a pillar of cloud, and it stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he called Aaron and Miriam, and they both went out. Okay. And then God speaks to them directly, and he says, please listen to my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, God, will make myself known to him in a vision. I will speak to him in a dream. So this is the way most prophets get their download, get their spiritual download from God, is that God speaks to them in a vision or in a dream. But he says, continuing, this is God's conversation with Aaron and Miriam, but this is not so with my servant Moshe. He is faithful throughout my household. With him I will speak mouth to mouth. Okay, this is the source for the idea that there was never a prophet as close to God as Moses, and there never will be. So with him I speak mouth to mouth, unambiguously, without riddle, so that he can behold the image of God. So why were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moshe? Okay, so God is uprating, is that the word? I'm not sure. He's letting them have it. Okay, he said, God displayed anger toward them, and then he left. Then the next verse says, the cloud departed from above the tent. That was sort of the cloud that God's presence was in. And behold, Miriam was afflicted with tzara'at, white as snow. So her skin, we talked about this sort of spiritual disease of tzara'at. It's not leprosy the way we understand leprosy, but her skin turned white as snow. Aaron turned to Miriam, and behold, she was afflicted with tzara'at, so he could plainly see it. Aaron said to Moshe, "Please, my master, do not hold us accountable for our sin, for we acted foolishly in sin." So this is Aaron going to his brother and saying, "We messed up. We're really sorry." Um, and he pleads with Moshe on behalf of their mutual sister Miriam and says, "Let her not remain like a dead person, for since she also came out of our mother's womb, it is as if half our flesh is consumed." And in response, in one of the most famous lines that Moshe utters and is used actually in contemporary times in a lot of healing services, um, where Moshe cries out to God saying, "Please, God, please heal her." Very brief. Kel na rifanala. It's in English, in Hebrew, it's not a lot of words. Okay. And God replies to Moshe, and he says, if her father were to spit in her face, would she not be humiliated for 7 days? She should be confined for 7 days outside the camp, and afterwards she may be readmitted to the camp. So God is going to forgive her, but he's going to make her sweat it out for 7 days outside the camp. And verse 15, this is almost the end of the parsha. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days. The people did not travel until Miriam had been readmitted to the camp. Okay, so they were just about to leave. This whole incident happens. They have to wait another week. Let's go into this a little bit deeper to just try to understand what was Miriam's sin and why was she punished. So in the chapter before this, in chapter 11, verse 27, there's a verse that says the lad, and in some opinions, the lad in this verse is Gershom, who is the son of Tzipporah, one of the two sons of Tzipporah and Moshe. The lad ran and told Moshe, saying, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. So when Tzipporah heard this, apparently the way this midrash goes, Tzipporah and Miriam were walking together. They overheard this, and she says to Miriam, "Woe to their wives, for they, Eldad and Medad, will separate from their wives, just as my husband is separated from me." Um, so this is kind of the first that Miriam has heard about the fact that number one, that Moses has separated from his wife, and number two, that Tzipporah is sad about it or unhappy about it. So Miriam and Aaron go to their brother and they um, accuse him of using his prophecy as a justification for abstaining from marital intimacy. And they say, this is in chapter 12, verse 2, has God spoken only to Moses? Has he not spoken to us too? So their argument is, we are also prophets of God, and we don't separate from our spouses. So you must have some other more nefarious reason for separating from your spouse. So Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch explains their claim a little bit more deeply. Since Miriam and Aaron's prophecy didn't require them to abstain from marital relationships, they're wondering why is Moshe doing it? Miriam actually was well-intentioned, and most of the rabbis judge her somewhat favorably, and it makes perfect sense in light of the fact that the Torah actually disapproves of celibacy. That there's even a teaching in the Gemara, in the Talmud, that Aaron's two sons who died, Nadav and Avihu, we learned about them for bringing that strange fire, that the rabbis in the Talmud make a pretty bold statement about them, and they say that one who does not engage in procreation is liable to death, as it says, and this comes from the book of Numbers, chapter 3, verse 4, and Nadav and Avihu died, and they had no children. The implication of that is, had they had children, they would not have died. So sort of the conclusion from this is that the fact that they had no children wasn't just a factoid that was thrown in there. It was spiritually significant because according to this view, they fail to fulfill the first or one of the first mitzvahs in the entire Torah, which is to be fruitful and multiply, what we say in Hebrew, pru or vu, and that contributed to their untimely death. So that's one level, but why Miriam was upset when she heard that Moshe separated from his wife. But there's another one, another approach. Miriam, if you remember all the way back to the very beginning of the book of Shemot, of the book of Exodus, Miriam was a midwife, and she was the midwife we know as Pua. She was a midwife of the Jewish people. Her whole motivation And going all the way back to when her father separated from her mother was to restore husbands and wives to each other and to keep babies, Israelite babies, alive. Without Miriam convincing her father to remarry her mother, Moshe would never have been born. And without her work as a midwife, all of those Israelite boys might have been killed. Okay. So, in light of her sense of commitment to this issue, she wants to grow the Israelite nation. We can understand how it must have been painful for her to see that her younger brother separated from his wife, thus ensuring they're not going to have any more children, because she has dedicated her life to helping the children of Israel and Moshe himself to have children and to have those children thrive. But what is that's sort of like some understanding of where she's coming from. What is the true error of hers? So there's one opinion that she did not speak out of malice. She truly cared about Moshe's marriage and truly thought that he was making a mistake and that he had decided and taken it upon himself to separate from his wife. But she was punished because she spoke to her other brother about him rather than to him. Had she gone to Moshe directly after this incident, when Zipporah said, "Oh, the poor wives of these other two prophets, then now they're going to have to separate from their husbands." If she had gone to Moshe directly and said, "This is what I heard. What is this all about?" that would have been acceptable. Instead, what she did was she went to their brother Aaron and they spoke about Moshe. Okay, and that God overheard it. So another opinion about the other mistake that Miriam and Aaron made was comparing them to Moshe. So they said, well, we also get prophecy. God also talks to us, and we don't separate from our spouses. So, here's the thing: regular prophets in biblical times did abstain from sexual relations, but only just prior to receiving prophecy. Moshe's prophecy was on a completely different level. And Moshe didn't just receive direct communication from God now and then, but he had to be ready at all times to receive prophecy. And so he was, in a singular point of view, he was alone in being commanded to separate from his wife. It isn't something that most prophets have had to do. Now, exactly why did he have to do that? Okay. Torah views marital intimacy as holy, even on the level of a mitzvah. However, before a prophet could receive prophecy, they had to undergo spiritual preparation. So that often included abstaining from marital relations, immersing in a mikvah, and entering into sort of a focused mental state because their prophecy came to them in dreams and visions. Okay. So before prophecy, everybody except Moshe has to undergo these spiritual preparations because prophecy requires that the body and the soul have to be fully aligned. And after intimacy, there's a period of ritual impurity that would temporarily prevent a prophet from receiving prophecy. Now, we know today, I actually don't know scientifically the exact amount of time, but there's a certain amount of time in a normal sex act that the sperm lasts inside the woman before it's no longer I don't know, active or whatever before it leaves her body. So I think is it 3 days? I'm not really sure. But there's a certain amount of time, and that amount of time is when he is in a state of tuma and he cannot or she cannot have access to prophecy. So the issue isn't that intimacy distracts from holiness. It's that it temporarily changes the state of the body. And Moshe didn't have the luxury of time to wait the time to go to the mikveh to prepare whatever on short notice because he had to be ready all the time. Okay. Now, here's an interesting question that came up in one of the books that I was preparing. Will Mashiach need to separate from his wife? So a person, all of us, we all have body and soul. And according to the mystical tradition in Judaism, the body corresponds to women and the soul corresponds to men. So there's a book written by Rebbetzin Chana Weisberg. It's called The Crown of Creation, and she explains that the essence of the physical existence of the body comes from actually a higher level than even the soul, which is not how we would normally assume so, but the body descends further down. Okay, if the body and soul meet each other in this world, the body, if it started out at a higher level, has to go down further. And so it is currently on a much lower level. That's why we experience materialism and physical things on a lower level than spiritual things. But in the Messianic era, the true essence of the body will be revealed, and the soul will somehow derive some spiritual nutrition from the body. This is very different, a very different concept, I think, than ascetic religions that teach that in order to have a spiritual experience, you have to transcend the body. That is not, at least according to this mystical approach, that is not a Torah perspective. And we talked before about not, it is not a Torah value to like abandon the physical world. It's a Torah value to take the physical world and elevate it to a higher spiritual dimension. So along comes Mashiach, God willing, soon. And he's the epitome of holiness, okay? He's not going to be detached from the physical the way Moshe was. He's going to have the capacity to synthesize the spiritual and the material. And from this, we can infer that Mashiach will not have to separate from his wife in the way that Moshe did. In other words, the sort of the laws of, I don't know if the laws of nature will change in the Messianic era such that materiality won't be the distraction that it is now. As a matter of fact, she continues that on the contrary, his relationship, that is Mashiach, his relationship with his wife, because remember in Torah perspective, Mashiach is a human being, a normal human being who will have a wife, that his relationship with his wife will empower him to achieve this ultimate spiritual rectification of all humanity. And I want to go a little bit deeper than this with a teaching from one of my teachers, who I'm sure I've mentioned to you before. Her name is Rebbetzin Devorah Fasthag. And she talks all the time about how women parallel the Shekhinah. Now, I don't know if you know what the Shekhinah is. I'm not sure that I fully understand it. I'm not sure that she fully understands it, but let me say this about it. The Shekhinah refers to the divine presence in our world, the sense of God that we can access, because God is so holy. He is way above any level that we can touch, but there's some aspects of him that we can connect to. It comes from, Shechina comes from the root word that means to dwell or to rest. It's not a name of God, but it's a description of the way that God is felt or manifested in our world, especially in places of holiness. So that includes the relationship between a husband and a wife. The Shechina, by the way, is a feminine noun, and it is often associated with the feminine. In rabbinic and also in Kabbalistic literature, the Shechina, we understand the Shechina's in Galut. It's in exile along with the Jewish people. Now, it is true that I am sitting in my home in Israel, but my people are still in exile because, as a whole, the Jewish people do not all live in this land. And we do not have the third temple. We do not have Messiah. And so we are still in exile. And not only are we still in exile, but God's presence, the Shekhinah, is in exile with us, and it is diminished or hidden because the world is still broken. Okay, so there's a famous midrash that also comes from the Talmud that says when Israel was exiled, the Shekhinah went with them. So it's like God sent us away, but sent us with some kind of spiritual accompaniment. Okay, in in the mystical tradition, the Shekhinah is depicted as constantly longing for reunification with the upper world. And everything that we do that is like right and aligned with God is part of that process of reunifying the Shekhinah and repairing. So it's sort of, this is sort of a not crass in the sense of being inappropriate, but like it's like a gross analogy, but if you imagine like God is this like perfect sphere and a piece of it chipped off or was broken off and was sent into exile along with the Jewish people, and that piece wants nothing more than to be reunited with the um, the larger um, the larger piece of from which it came. Okay, so since women parallel the Shekhinah, this is really intense stuff. I hope you guys are doing okay with this. Okay. Um, since women parallel the Shekhinah, much about the true nature of women and the feminine is hidden in our world, and it won't be fully revealed until the Messianic era. So everything that we experience as women, some of which is beginning to change in some circumstances, but there's still plenty of, just for want of a better word, I'll just call it sexism that we all suffer from to one degree or another, whether it's access to certain spaces or earning potential or societal expectations or whatever it is clear that we have not completely redeemed the Shekhinah, and women as a whole, the feminine as a whole, is um, is in a kind of exile. And so I study with this teacher once a week, and when we come up to this idea of something else that happened, whatever, I always think to myself, when this all gets resolved and the world is exposed to what feminine power, feminine spiritual energy really is, it's going to blow a lot of people's minds. Um, I just I want to close out this section of Miriam's sin and punishment with a commentary on the last verse of this chapter 12 verse 15. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days. The people did not travel until Miriam had been readmitted to the camp. This is reward for the fact that Miriam waited for Moshe when he was a baby. If you remember that story, right? Baby Moses in the basket, and Miriam's like hanging out by the bushes to see what will become of him. So now, as a reward for that, the entire nation is waiting for her. That despite her mistake, it's showing God's mercy, and that um, he metes out justice in a fair way. Okay, so yes, she was punished, but there was some compensation there. Okay, she was not completely isolated, and everybody was waiting for her to finish her punishment. Okay, now, period. So, a lot of times, this story of Miriam that comes right out of this week's Parsha, when you hear Jews talking about this story, they will talk about the concept of Lashon HaRa. And Lashon HaRa literally means evil speech or evil tongue. And when I was first becoming religious many decades ago, I spent a lot of time with people who were in the same stage of growth as Jews. And a friend of mine, I remember she said to me that when she learned the laws of Lashon Hara, that made her want to live according to the Torah, because these laws, um, you'll see that they make a lot of sense. Now, I don't know the answer to the question that some of you may be asking, or you will ask in the next half hour, which is, how does this apply to me? I don't know exactly the answer to that, but what I can say is that you will see that the general rules of Lashon Hara are a smart way to live. They are a holy way to live. Whether you are exactly obligated in the same way as a Jew, that I can't say, but these are um, the laws of Lashon Hara and so forth are something that I hope that you will resonate with, and you will see that it is a way that will help elevate not only your. Let me pause here and say that we sometimes divide mitzvot into three categories. There's a bunch of different ways to divide them up, but one of the ways that we divide them up is mitzvot that have to do with a person and God, right? Something that's between you and God. Like, let's say your prayer. Okay, that's between you and God. It doesn't really involve a whole lot of other people, especially if you're a woman. One is about mitzvot between you and yourself. And I can't think of a single example of that, but that's another category. It's called Bein Adam Lechaver, Bein Adam La'atzmi, the between a person and themselves. Maybe it's like for example, maybe eating kosher. Okay, like what you put in your body. That's like between you and yourself. And then the third category, which this falls into, is bein adam lechavero, which is between a person and another person. Okay, so lashon hara, which I told you means evil. Lashon is tongue. It also means language. So we're just going to call it evil speech. It refers to various kinds of language that are prohibited by Jewish law, all kinds of prohibited speech, whether it's true or not true, what you're saying. Um, Sometimes it's translated as malicious gossip, but technically, the word lashon hara technically only refers to something you say that's true about another person, but it's damaging. Okay. So lashon hara is any derogatory or damaging statement against another person. And there's a sort of a simple test for determining whether something is or is not lashon hara. Okay. So if you if a statement about another person would be publicized and then it would cause that person either physical or monetary damage or would cause them emotional anguish or something like that, that's lashon hara. Okay. So anything that you say, even if you say it privately to a third party, to a second party about a third party, even if it's true, if it were if it was publicized or it was well known and it would cause harm to that person or embarrassment to that person, that's lashon hara. Now, there's actually different kinds of forbidden speech. There's three primary categories of problematic speech in the way Torah understands it. The first is richilut, motzi shemra, and then lashon hara. So let's go into it. The most general is richilut. Okay, it's like sort of plain ordinary gossip. It isn't necessarily negative. It's like simply going around and telling people what other people have done or said that's true. Okay, but it's gossip. You know gossip when you hear it. You know what gossip is. Um, Now, sometimes there's negative speech that's false. The person saying it just made it up. They're accusing somebody of something it isn't true. That's called motzi shemra. That literally means it gives a bad name, but it we would think of it as slander or defamation. Okay, that's a second case. So we have general gossip, slander or defamation, and then lashon hara, which technically refers to any speech that causes harm, like saying that somebody is a bad driver or they broke the law or something. The statement might be true, but if speaking about if it coming out of your mouth is going to hurt the person that it's said about, then it's lashon hara. Okay. Um, Now, even though lashon hara technically, the phrase technically refers only to something that's true but is harmful, it's not malicious lies. Malicious lies have their own category, and it's not harmless gossip, which has its own category. In practice, the way people talk about lashon hara is that it encompasses all three. So it is lashon hara even if it's true, even if um, the listener pressures the speaker to tell, right? So you can imagine a conversation between two people. One of them has a little bit of information and the other one sort of tries to weasel it out of them. Come on, I know you know what's going on with Susie and John and, whatever. Even if names are left out, but people will know, like you don't mention the name of who it is, but like everybody knows who it is. Even if it's about your own family, and even if you include yourself in in the in the lashon hara, okay? So um, it can be factual, like stating that somebody violated a commandment. I saw Sally eating a cheeseburger. Okay. Well, that's a Jewish example, but something like that. Or it can be subjective. Like if you're discussing if someone's intelligent or attractive or generous, you might say something like, well, she's not the sharpest tool in the shed, or can you believe the clothes that she's wearing? Or the truth is that this is really a bad kind because these are unverifiable opinions that make people think badly about other people and can influence the future relationship between the hearer, so there's three parties here, right? There's the speaker, the hearer, and the person about whom this evil speech is being spoken. And I can tell you, and maybe you can think for yourself, there are times when somebody told me something about a third party that I, even if I really wanted not to believe it because I didn't have any evidence, it left like a taint, like I didn't see that person the same way anymore. And you probably have had that experience happen as well. It isn't necessarily something that was true or something that was verifiable, but it was something that somebody shared with me in confidence or whatever that I should not have listened to, I should not have accepted, um, and I couldn't shake off. Okay. Now, sometimes whether something is Lashon Hara or not depends on the situation. So here's an example. If you are telling that so and so gave a certain amount of money for charity, it can be derogatory if it's said about one person, but positive when applied to somebody else. Like here's an example. Let's say you say that Penelope gave $10 to charity. If Penelope is a very wealthy person, then saying she gave $10 to charity counts as Lashon Hara because for Penelope to only give $10 is like she's not doing what up to her means, up to her level. But if you say that Peter, trying to come up with these names off the top of my head, Peter gave $10, but Peter is known to be either he's poor or he's a student, he has very limited income, but even so, he gave $10 to charity. The implication on that is not Lashon Hara because wow, Peter gave $10. See, it's the same exact statement, but it depends on the context and who you say it about. Um, and some kinds of statements that are not about a person explicitly, but they're Lashon Hara nevertheless. Like it could be something about their possessions. It could be something degrading that a person would say about a whole other group of people that reflects unfavorably upon all the people who are members of that group, right? So, um, oh, people who go to that congregation, they believe blah, 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 or something like that. Okay. So it's not about a specific person explicitly, it's about a whole group of people. And by the way, it doesn't even have to be speech, it doesn't have to be words that come out of your mouth because we as human beings are capable of communicating derogatory or damaging opinions with body language, a raised eyebrow, pointing, rolling your eyes. You know how that goes. That
Hmm.
also falls in the prohibition of Lashon Hara. What is the biblical source? Where do we see that this is an issue, the commandment not to engage in Lashon Hara? So the term Lashon Hara actually never appears in the Bible. The closest approximation is in the book of Tehillim, in the book of Psalms, chapter 34, verses 13 and 14. And it says, "Who is the man who is eager for life, who desires years of good fortune? Guard your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceitfully." Okay. So that's interestingly enough, the Hebrew phrase eager for life in that verse is chafetz chaim, it like a person who desires life. That is the title of the most important volume that details the laws of Lashon Hara. It was published originally in 1873 by Yisrael Meir Kagan, who was a Polish rabbi, and he became known as the Chafetz Chaim. So today there's something called the Chafetz Chaim Heritage Foundation, and they promote in all kinds of ways. They're speaking to a Jewish audience, but they do promote in all kinds of ways the the importance of knowing these laws, learning these laws over and over again, and following them. Um, so for example, they have a book that divides the laws of Lashon Hara into like a half a year's daily study. So when I was learning these laws, and really I should review them, but when I was originally learning them, every day after I finished my morning prayers, I would learn that day's passage. Okay. And all together, it's very, very specific. And I'm not suggesting that you need to do that or that you need to hold yourself as non-Jews to that standard. But the Chavetz Chaim Heritage Foundation does have as its mission to teach about the importance of guarding one's tongue and being careful about the things that we say as a way of um, promoting harmony among people. Now, there's another thing that they do, which They get a bunch of people to agree to take on like an hour or a 2 hour shift during which they promise they will be super, super, super careful not to say anything that could fall in the realm of Lashon HaRa. So let's say that my shift was like 10 in the morning to noon, and then Vicky had a shift from noon to 2, and Natalie had a shift from 2 to 4. And in that way, we would cover the whole day in our little group. And no Lashon HaRa would be, we would all be credited with guarding our tongues for that period of time. It's just there's a lot. They do films that they release to communities. They publish books. There's a lot of material online that they put out. Okay, let's go back to the Bible. The laws of Lashon Hara are they basically derive from two principal sources. One is in the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 16. This is the one that prohibits gossip. You shall not go around as a gossip monger among your people. You shall not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood. I am the Lord. Okay, so God is saying, giving this commandment to the people, saying, don't do this, and don't do this. Why? Because I am God, and I'm telling you, this is not a good proper way for my people to behave. This verse from Leviticus is referring to rechilut, simple gossip. Okay, repeating information about other people, even if it's true, and even if it's not negative. And I'm going to skip that part. Okay, the other is in the book of Exodus, chapter 23, verse 1, which prohibits passing on false rumors. And it says, you shall not accept a false report. Do not place your hand with a wicked person to be a false witness. I, regardless of how specific you want to get into these laws, because the laws as they apply specifically to the Jewish people are extremely detailed. And I'll tell you a story in a little bit about a situation that we had that we had to be careful about. But how bad is Lashon Hara? So in Jewish law, the broad category of Lashon Hara, of speaking poorly about other people, is considered an extremely significant sin because it harms the social cohesion. And it's very difficult to atone for because once the speech has gone out in the world, once you've said whatever, I don't mean you, because none of you would ever do this, but once a person has said something unkind about other people, it's virtually impossible to undo the damage. And so, according to Jewish law, both the person who spoke it and the person who listened to it and accepted it, they are both liable. So I'm going to tell you a story. Okay. In a small town somewhere in Eastern Europe lived a nice man with a nasty problem. He talked too much about other people. He could not help himself. Whenever he heard a story about somebody he knew and sometimes about somebody he didn't know, he just had to tell his friends. Now, he was in business and he heard quite a lot of rumors and stories, and he loved the attention he got. And he was delighted when his friends laughed because they loved the way that he told his stories, which he sometimes would embellish with little details that he invented to make them funnier or juicier. And other than that, he was a really pleasant, good hearted man. He kind of knew it was wrong, but it was too tempting. And in any case, most of what he told had actually really happened. So what he was saying was true, and many of his stories were just kind of innocent and entertaining. So one day he finds out something really kind of weird but true about another businessman in his town. And of course he feels compelled to share what he knows with all of his colleagues, who tells it to their friends, who tells it to people that they knew, who tells them, to their families, who spoke to their friends and neighbors. And this little juicy tidbit went all around town until the businessman who was the main character in the story, it got back to him. And he ran to the rabbi of the town and he complained that his reputation is now ruined. Nobody's going to want to do business with him after this. Um, and so he says, Rabbi, you have to do something. So the rabbi summons in the man who loves to tell stories, and the nice man with the nasty problem hears from the rabbi how devastated his colleague is, and he really feels sorry because he didn't, and he's just entertaining his friends with this cute little story. He didn't mean to hurt anybody. He honestly hadn't considered it that big of a deal. Um, And he told the rabbi, it is really true. You can check it out if you want. And the rabbi sighs and he says, true, not true, that makes no difference. You can't just go around telling stories about people. It's all Lashon HaRa. And the rabbi says it's like murder in the sense that you have killed this person's reputation. Okay. And he's talking to this man, and the man now really feels very bad, very sorry. And he says, what can I do to make it undone? I'll do anything, Rabbi. I'll do anything that you say. And the rabbi looks at him and he says, do you have a feather pillow in your house? And the guy says, Rabbi, I'm not a poor man. Of course I have a whole bunch of feather pillows. What do you want me to do? Should I sell them? And the rabbi says, no, just bring me one. So the man doesn't understand where the rabbi's going with this, but he returns a little later to the rabbi's study with a nice fluffy feather pillow under his arm. And the rabbi opens the window and he hands him a knife and he tells the guy, cut it open. And the guy says, but Rabbi, this is your study. It's going to make a mess. And the rabbi insists that he does what he says. So the man cuts the pillow and a cloud of feathers comes out. A lot of them fly out the window because remember, he opened the window. There's this big swirling, whirling trail of white feathers. And the rabbi waits 10 minutes before he says anything to the man. And he says to the man, okay, now bring back all the feathers and stuff them back into your pillow. All of them. You can't miss any of them. And the man stares at the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, that's impossible. I can get the ones that are here in the room, but most of them flew out the window. They're gone. I can't do that. You know that. And the rabbi says, yes, I know. That is how it is. That once a rumor or a gossipy story or a secret leaves your mouth, you don't know where it ends up. It flies on the wind and you can never get it back. And so he orders the man to apologize to the person that he told the story about, which is awkward, uncomfortable, painful, embarrassing. Better not to put yourself in that situation in the first place. But anyway, it was the least he could do. And he also has to apologize to the people that he told the story to, because that makes them sort of guilty also, because they listened. Remember, the person speaking and the person listening are both judged by God. And he orders everybody to diligently study the laws about Lashon HaRa every day for a year. And so that's what they did. Okay, they all studied about it and they learned as a community the importance of guarding their tongue and so forth. Okay, that's the story. It's a really famous story. If you ask any Jew about, if you say Lashon HaRa and feather pillow, they'll tell you this story. But it's such a good visual for understanding that when something comes out of our mouth, we no longer have control over where it goes. Okay. Um, in the Talmud, I see that we're running out of time. So the Talmud records a number of sayings about the seriousness of Lashon HaRa, and it equates it with denying the existence of God, the three cardinal sins of murder, idolatry, and sexual immorality. There's also something called avak Lashon HaRa, which is literally means the dust of Lashon HaRa. And this is understood to refer to language that it just implies Lashon HaRa, or it might cause other people to speak. Like if you are in a social situation and you know that you are with a group of people who doesn't particularly like a third party, and you say something positive about that third party, what that might generate is them coming up with all of the things they don't like about that person. Does that make sense? So that's called a vak lashon hara. You haven't actually said any lashon hara. What you've said is something positive about a third party, but you've said it in the company of people that you know don't like that person or judge them harshly or whatever. Um, so um, okay. Also, the other side of that is that listening to or believing lashon hara is also prohibited for two reasons. Um, you can't By listening to it, you may find yourself believing it, especially if it's like a friend who tells you that. And also, just by participating, if it's a group conversation of any kind, if it's more than just you and a speaker, if there's other people involved, by you participating in this Lashon Hara fest, you are encouraging other people to commit the sin of listening to and believing this Lashon Hara. So believing Lashon Hara is forbidden regardless of the subject and regardless of the speaker. However, having said that, there are some times when it is not only permissible, but it is required to say something negative about a third party. Okay, so I'll give you an example. If the information might be necessary or of benefit, um, wait, Valerie has asked a question, but I can't get to it right now. Um, if the information would be something that a potential business partner, potential roommate, potential spouse, it is permissible for that person to listen to it. Now, there's some rules about this in Jewish law that the listener has to say why he's listening to the information. The speaker has to be very clear that I'm saying this for a constructive reason. And I'm going to give you so let's say that a former roommate tells a person who's thinking about becoming roommates with somebody that this person doesn't pay their rent on time. That's something you would actually need to know. There's a constructive purpose for that. It's not just so that you can decide before you sign the contract or whatever. Or if you are about to go into business with somebody and somebody knows that because he was in business with that person or she was in business with that person previously, there's some information there. But there are rules about that too. I'm not going to go too deeply in it because I really want to tell you um, this example. So there was this guy that I knew who had been engaged to a woman that I knew, and they didn't make it like they broke up before they were engaged, but they broke up before the wedding. And he cheated her financially. Um, and then we heard that he was engaged to somebody else. And so we went to a rabbi. When I say we, it was a few people that were involved in this scenario. We went to a rabbi to get guidance. Are we allowed to tell the current fiance what we know about the way that he basically cheated the first fiance out of money? That is not something that we would have undertaken on our own, but we did get guidance, and it is for a constructive purpose in order to protect this second fiance. And we did tell her, and as far as I know, they did break the engagement. But there's very specific laws about when and under what circumstances you can do that without transgressing the laws. There's a saying, I don't know where it comes from, and I'm sorry, I don't know where it comes from. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. So here's the bottom line is that we have to guard our tongues very much. And it is something that almost everybody slips on. Even though I know, um, even though I know these laws and I know how serious a sin it is, and I know it's something I shouldn't be doing, it's a very hard mitzvah to keep. And very good, decent religious people fail in this all the time, which is not to say, oh, it's too hard for me. I'm not even going to try. Um, and but you can see how when you avoid speaking in a derogatory way about a third party, how that would make relationships smoother and make social cohesion easier and so forth. I told you that there are books of daily study with the laws of Lashon HaRa, community programs people sign up for an hour or two where they say, I'm not going to speak Lashon HaRa during my time period. Usually, by the way, that's done in the merit of somebody else. Let's say there's a sick person who needs healing, or a woman who wants to get pregnant, she's having trouble getting pregnant. She can get the community to commit to this for a certain period of time for her, and that in the merit of them um, promising not to speak Lashon Hara, then that's how it works. Okay. I am looking at the time. I don't really have um, I don't really have time to do all of the life lessons, but I just want to do this last one that I prepared. And that is this concept that words have power. So Miriam, going back, tying the two things together, Miriam speaks Lashon Hara about Moshe, and she's punished with Sarat. And so it underscores the serious impact of our speech, even though the rabbis say she meant well. She didn't hate her brother. She wasn't trying to badmouth him. She was trying to get him to reunite with his wife because she did not understand his special status until God kind of laid it out there for her. Okay. Um, and um, there's another midrash that if Miriam, who was herself a prophetess and the sister of Moshe, and a leader among women, was punished for this slip of the tongue, how much more careful do we need to be? Okay, so um, that is pretty much that is pretty much lesson. Now let me see if I can go back to the chat and see if anybody's asked anything that I can answer. Um, okay, Valerie says, how do you come to the defense of someone? This is incredibly hard. If you hear somebody speaking in a derogatory way about another person and you overhear it, ideally, you will either try to change the subject, remove yourself um, from the conversation, or say to the person, if it's a person who is aware of these laws, say to the person, you are really like you're in like Lashon HaRa territory here, and let's not go there. Okay. But that can be embarrassing because then you can come across as like, oh, holier than thou, like, you never say anything bad about anybody else, blah, blah, blah. And this starts a whole other thing. So the rabbis advise that it is very hard when this is not a direct answer, Valerie, but it's what happens when somebody's being spoken about. That the best thing is just to try to derail the conversation or to change the subject. Um, Elizabeth, what is this Proverbs verse that you refer to? Proverbs 18:21.
Life, power of the tongue, life and death, power of the tongue.
Okay, that was the source. Okay, thank you. All right. And then Kathy said, working in the social work field, it's been very challenging for me to figure out how it fits in with Lashon HaRa and how to apply it in that field. So again, in a professional setting, so my husband is he's a high school teacher, among his many other things. He teaches in a girls' high school, and they have faculty meetings. And in those faculty meetings, they discuss the kids, who's struggling with this issue, who needs extra support in that issue. That is called what we say in Hebrew, litoelet, meaning it's purposeful. This is not just, um, you know, like
Yeah.
like saying nasty things about other people. It is purposeful and it is permitted. Now, so as a social worker, certainly you know the difference between when you are sharing about a client or another social worker or whatever, that somebody needs this information in order to protect the client, to serve the client, to protect whatever. That is not only permissible but required. So I tried to make that distinction that I'm talking about like everyday life when you just say things about people you really don't need to be saying, not in a professional setting where you have to discuss certain things. But if you were in, let's say, I'm guessing this isn't true for you, but let's say that you were in a religious Jewish social work agency, okay, and people were sensitive about this, there might be some guidelines about how we speak about clients, with whom we speak about clients, under what circumstances, blah, blah, blah. But in general, if you're trying to observe this because you think this is going to please God, and it is, if you're careful about this. Um, if you are trying to do this in an environment where nobody's ever heard of this and nobody thinks that talking about other gossiping or saying things that are true about other people, that there's anything spiritually wrong with that or harmful about that, it's a lot harder. But I think this is a situation where anything that we do that moves us closer to um, to the goal of cutting down on the amount of this kind of talk that we do, I think God understands that. It's like you're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm never ever going to say anything about another person ever again. That's not reasonable. You can't go from 0 to 60. But if you have in your mind a consciousness that this is one of God's rules for humanity, that he doesn't want us to speak harshly about each other, then and you become more conscious of it and more careful about it in your everyday life, that's a spiritual elevation. That's spiritual growth. That is pleasing to God. Okay, we're basically out of time. Does anybody have anything really burning, pressing that you want to say? Vicky, yes, you can unmute yourself and
I really want to thank you for this teaching. It's actually very triggering for me, but because in the messianic world, the Hebrew roots world, this Lashon HaRa is really used. And I've heard so many stories to really hide abuse in marriages and in other families. And we were in a situation where something happened to us personally. And when we tried going to our community for help, basically, we were shunned and excommunicated, and we were told, oh, all of that is Lashon Haran, when it was something that was specifically that happened with our daughter. And it's just really, really, I've been wanting to learn these laws, but like even right now, just talking about it, like we've gone to therapy for it. People specifically use these laws to say, no, you have to shut up and you can't tell anything or say anything to not only what happened to your daughter, but a lot of things that we want to warn the community of what happened with our daughter. So can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, it makes no sense to me that if we don't have guidance, if we don't have elders, we don't have rabbis to go to, how can we apply that to our lives with no community?
Right. So I will say that the way this was shared with you is a total distortion
Mm.
because these laws are supposed to protect social cohesion, not
Mm.
hide abuse, God forbid, or cheating or anything like that. Okay. And as I said, there are circumstances where not only are you are um, what is it, permitted, but you are required to speak up. Like the example I gave you
Mm.
of this couple that was engaged, and we had to. It wasn't fun. It wasn't comfortable. But and this second fiance wasn't somebody that I knew, but I knew that she was a Jewish woman, and she was about to marry somebody that I knew firsthand had lied and cheated and stole from somebody else. And so we did go to a rabbi for guidance about what we can say and what we can't say, but he told us absolutely it is our responsibility to share that. So you were misled and mistaught, and it doesn't it doesn't make sense that a set of laws that is designed to protect relationships could be used to harm them. So it, it is rather Lashon Hara is like a nuanced tool if you do it correctly. It's a nuanced tool that somebody just used like a sledgehammer, right? And that is um, it's just a mistake. It's just you were mistaught. You were
Well, and
wrong.
I appreciate you saying that. And again, I handled things very terribly in the moment, and I could look back, and these laws are so beautiful. And I want my children to learn them. I'm even getting the book. If you could share a book with us of maybe that would be good for us as non-Jewish people that we could kind of handle, because it makes perfect sense to guard your mouth. It's definitely something that, it almost manifests in your life. But just to hear you say that, no, we are to talk about, you know things that are going on, and it's this is rampant in all these communities. This is not something that just happened to me or us. It happens a lot in the Hebrew roots community. This
It's
law is used
it's a
against
misteaching.
especially
It's yeah,
women,
yeah, it's a misteaching.
especially against women.
I'm
So
sorry you
thank
had that
you.
experience. I'm really sorry that something so holy and beautiful that's intended to uplift people was used to hurt your family. But it's not correct. I will. Okay, so when Natalie, I see you want to say something. Just let me say this. I don't know this. We're like in this area of the literature that you guys need, like interpreting this for non-Jews. I don't think it exists. The
No.
best I can do is share with you books on the topic that are for Jews and have you extract from that what you think makes sense for you in your life. Interestingly enough, one of my rabbinic colleagues just put out a book, and I think we talked about this before, about Shabbat for non-Jews. He's a neighbor, an Orthodox rabbi, and I can send you that link as well. And so these books are beginning to be written, but what you asked for exactly doesn't exist. I'm not even sure. I know that there are books about Lashon Hara for children because I know my grandchildren have them. I don't know how old your children are. If they're older, these might be too babyish, but that's the best I can offer. And I'm happy to share those resources when we get off. Natalie, you want to say something and then we'll finish up.
Yes, I just wanted very, very quick. When I started to discover the Jewish way of living, I was reading the newspaper uh, Hamad, Ahmadiyya, Amodia,
Amodia.
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 And the first thing that struck me, it was this girl who was speaking about Lashon HaRa and how they should speak. And for me, it was like, oh, wow, we need that so much. And this is one of the first things that I've learned. We were picking up the newspaper in London when we were going over there. And I was reading all the little bits because I knew that I could glean, like I could start to glean things. And it was just, it makes so much sense. And Lashon Hara, for me, it was like one of the first fruit to see of living like a righteous, trying to live a righteous life. And I have the book of Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim, is it
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And is okay. They might have things who are like too much, but it's like you have so much good things in it that you can start to strive towards it. And it's very good. Sometimes books for kids are very good because it's like breaking up things in an easy way.
Okay, so I'll send you guys some links to that. All right, you guys. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
joining me.
much, Rivka.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure to be with you guys. Bye.
Thank you.